Here's an impossible question. How does anyone know if Donald Trump will do what he says he'll do? Well, stock markets might be starting to figure out how to answer that, and I can show you how. 2025, S&P 500, America's biggest companies. January, everything's okay. Better than okay, even with Donald Trump's inauguration. Around this point, though, is where Trump's tariff talk starts to feel real.
The tariffs are so important because without the tariffs, our nation would be imperiled.
But very importantly, tomorrow tariffs 25% on Canada and 25% on Mexico.
It rattled investors because blowing up trade and making everything more expensive, that's a big downside of tariffs. But that was nothing. Because what Trump still likes to call Liberation Day, sweeping reciprocal tariffs, not just on a small handful of countries, but on the entire world, that triggered one of the worst stock collapses in American history.
An exceptionally brutal day on Wall Street. President Trump's tariffs sparking a huge sell-off today.
And it didn't really matter which stock index you were tracking. The UK, Germany, Japan, Hong Kong, China, the world panicked, erasing several $1 trillion worth of investor value. Now, once it became clear that Trump was delaying these reciprocal tariffs,
President Trump has announced that there will be a 90-day pause.
Markets simmered down, climbed back even. But here's where we get to this question of whether anyone actually believes Trump's tariff threats anymore. Because right here is when that 90-day pause was set to expire. Did the markets flinch? Not really. And here is where Trump announced a new deadline, a full return to those cataclysmic Liberation Day tariffs coming on August 1st. But again, a relatively muted response from world markets. So you get headlines like these, suggesting the vast majority of people with real money on the line, they'll only believe the tariffs when they see them. Even when Trump states the new deadline explicitly and that there will be no change to this date. No extensions will be granted.
You've been inundated with this. You've grown tired of this. You've become accustomed to this. The uncertainty is becoming normalized.
It's hard to know how to interpret Trump's deadlines because he sets and then delays them all the time.
25% on Mexico and Canada.
President Trump's tariffs against Canada will now be put on hold.
On the tariffs, is there any room left for Canada and Mexico to make a deal before midnight? And should we expect those Chinese tariffs, the extra 10%, to take effect
No room
tomorrow?
left for Mexico or for Canada. No, the tariffs, they're all set. They go into effect tomorrow.
The White House is easing up on some of the tariffs it imposed on Canada and Mexico, giving the big three U.S. automakers a 1-month exemption.
And we don't need to belabor the point that the much vaunted Liberation Day tariffs were almost entirely postponed, apart from a 10% base rate applied worldwide, and then now delayed again from July 9th to August 1st. But even this newer, firm deadline isn't necessarily going to hold for everyone. Here's the tariff letter Trump just sent to Japan's prime minister, threatening actually a slightly higher tariff than what Trump promised on Liberation Day, but ending on an entirely vague note that these tariffs may be modified upward or downward, depending on our relationship with your country.
I would say firm, but not 100% firm. If they call up and they say, would like to do something a different way, we're going to be open to that.
To which critics have responded largely in one of two ways. Either to say, well, of course none of this is 100% firm. None of it ever was, because it was never realistic to think that the US could negotiate even a single trade deal in a matter of weeks, never mind holding talks with the whole world.
There's a difference between agreements to kick the can and agreements that actually solve problems.
Usually these trade deals are hundreds of pages long, they're very detailed, and they take years to hash out.
But the other reaction has been to say, I guess every day is Taco Tuesday?
Trump always chickens out. It is an acronym that today got a lot of talk on Wall Street.
Mr. President, Wall Street analysts have coined a new term called the taco trade. They're saying Trump always chickens out on your tariff threats, and that's why markets are higher this week. What's your response to that?
I kick out?
Chicken out.
Oh, isn't that nice? Chicken out. I've never heard that.
Yeah, so it turned into a thing. There's even a Wikipedia page about it. And what has reinforced this notion that Trump frequently backs down from his most extreme policies, and why stock markets appear to believe that there's no reason to freak out, is that the bar for what qualifies as a deal that pushes Trump off his hardest positions is lower than you'd think.
The president's phone, I can tell you, rings off the hook from world leaders all the time who are begging him to come to a deal.
In the next 24 hours, will we hear a flurry of deals?
Yeah, we have a lot of them going out, but the deals are mostly my deal to them.
So I'll be honest, I don't really know how to interpret Trump's comment here, because it sounds like he's saying he thinks of basically anything he does to another country as being a kind of deal with that country.
The deals are mostly my deal to them.
But even the specific deals that he has reached that have led to the US backing down on some of its tariffs, well, for starters, there are only two right now, one with the UK and one with Vietnam. And the deal with the UK isn't so much a trade agreement as it is setting the table for one. It deals primarily in intentions to improve trade and commitments to work towards some kind of negotiated outcome. But there are really very few settled details. There is, for example, a reduction in US tariffs on British cars. But even the earlier framework Trump's most recent executive order references has additional detail, comes with a broad disclaimer that both the United States and the United Kingdom recognize that this document does not constitute a legally binding agreement. Translation, there's still a lot of work to be done.
The UK agreement only made concessions on a handful of items, and it was essentially an agreement to talk about those items. So if you define a deal as winnowing down a large complex relationship to a few key items and agreeing to talk about those items in the future, saying we intend to try and get the tariff down to X% in the future, then yes.
And the only real evidence we have right now of a deal with Vietnam is this post on Truth Social, where Trump simply says that he's just made a trade deal with Vietnam involving 20% US tariffs on incoming Vietnamese goods in exchange for total access to Vietnamese markets, which Trump claims will mean zero tariffs on US goods. But is there any sign of an actual agreement between these two countries? Any details about how any of this would work? No, because neither the US nor Vietnam has released anything to that effect.
Well, we have nothing. People are beginning to suggest that the Vietnamese understanding of the agreement and the American understanding of the agreement may not be the same. All the United States has to go on is what Trump said. There is some degree of suspicion that it's more complicated than that.
Now, none of this is to say that fruitful deals for the US aren't coming. But as every expert told us, these things take time. And it all goes some way in explaining why not everybody expects Trump's threats to be made real. Now, it's important to make room for what Trump claims is actually just how you get deals done. Like how, yes, he paused his sweeping Liberation Day tariffs, but really to be able to continue using them as a threat, which is leverage.
We have an end date of July 9th. You call that chickening out?
Now, okay, we know now that July 9th wasn't exactly a hard end date, since extended to August 1st, but the point stands. What critics call chickening out could actually be the opposite, which is applying pressure.
It's called negotiation. You set a number. And if you go down, if I set a number at a ridiculous high number and I go down a little bit, a little bit.
So we know from negotiation research, right, that anchoring is powerfully successful in shifting where outcomes happen. And in that sense, we can maybe credit President Trump.
He prepares the public, his counterparty that he negotiates with, the entire world, for the maximalist position so that he can actually get through the public and the counterparty, something that in a previous negotiating period or in previous time would have been seen as really, really difficult to achieve.
So maybe this is just what putting the screws to someone looks like. It keeps trade partners or rivals off balance. It reminds them constantly and perpetually of how close to trade oblivion they are if they fail to appease the United States. And let's not forget, many of Trump's tariffs do stick. Canada, for example, still faces sectoral tariffs of up to 50% on cars, steel, and aluminum. And combined with tariffs to come, Trump's Treasury Secretary believes they will raise more than $300 billion just by the end of this year. But one potential cost of that is credibility.
The downside is, at some point, if they don't, meet your red line, you're put in the position of either making good on that threat or not making good on that threat. And to the extent you don't make good on that threat, people start to learn your patterns.
The other element, too, is any deal with Trump is, in essence, a handshake deal. There's no guarantee that he's going to honor the agreement.
Is it worthwhile cutting a deal with the United States if you can't count on it sticking and being the deal? In other words, are you going to move the goalposts? And the U.S. answer to that so far has been, yes, we might do that.
But here's the thing. While this does create a whole heck of a lot of uncertainty for anyone trying to navigate a very volatile trade universe, Trump is managing to do something very unusual. He is resurrecting his most maximalist and punishing trade policy, the threat of astronomical tariffs, but apparently, at least for now, without inciting the kind of market panic that occurred the last time. What was extreme just a couple of months ago elicits hardly any reaction at all today. That's a magic trick no other US president in recent memory has pulled.